you have a pension at work, and are you familiar with the payout options? Well, here to talk with us about that is Amy Shepard from Sensible Money. Amy, welcome.
Hi, Bob. Thank you.
Pleasure to have you here. Where to begin? Where do folks need to start?
Well, I think the first thing is when you have a pension, it's something to celebrate for the most part. They are becoming less and less common, and so it can feel like a relief to know that you have something like that as you enter retirement. And then when you sit down to look at the options of, how do you structure your pension, it could feel overwhelming because, like most financial decisions, there are a ton of options, and deciding which one is the right one for you is not always straightforward. There's a lot of variables. So we can talk through the most common options. That's what I've outlined in the article. The most straightforward one is what's called a single life option, where it is paid out based on a one person's life expectancy. So it's the simplest in the sense that if you choose that option, you receive a payment for as long as you live. And when you die, the pension payments stop. That's how it works. And so it can make a lot of sense for single people that don't have, a spouse or anyone else relying on their income. It can also make sense in a situation where maybe a married couple, they both have pensions. And so if they each elect the single life pension, they know they always have their own pension income to rely on. If a spouse passes away, that respective pension would stop. But it is the simplest. It's the most straightforward and the easiest to figure out, what the benefit's going to be and know that it lasts as long as you live.
Right. So any pros and cons that are worth noting?
Yeah, one of the biggest benefits to the single life pension is that of all the options, it has the highest payment. So since it's only based on one person's life expectancy, you get a higher, usually monthly payment amount. And so that's definitely the biggest advantage. The cons, the biggest con there is that if you do have a surviving spouse and they are reliant on that pension income, and you pass away first and that pension income stops, that could, potentially have a pretty big impact on the surviving spouse if they don't have other assets to make up that pension stream.
So there's another version of the single life payout too that comes with a special feature?
There is a what's called a single life with period certain. That's the formal name for it. And it works very similar in the sense that it pays out for, an individual's lifetime, but you can guarantee at least a minimal amount of payments. And so a really common one that people often see is what's called single life with 10-year period certain. And so what that means is it'll pay out for your lifetime. But if you were to die within the first 10 years of starting, it guarantees at least 10 years of payments. And so it adds a little bit extra layer of protection where, if something happened to you early or unexpected, at least you know that 10 years worth of that pension stream will get paid out. There's also different versions where you could do, a 5-year period certain or a 20-year period certain. So they all work the same way, but it's like the single life pension, just with at least a minimal guaranteed period.
So are there some examples for whom this makes sense?
Yes, there are. It can make sense for people who they like the guarantee, they like the certainty. If they're worried about, they want to do the single life pension, but they don't like the idea if, something unexpectedly happens to them, that benefit that they earned just evaporates. That could make sense. It's, maybe not a math decision in that respect, but maybe more of an emotional one of just feeling like even if you're not here, that benefit you earned still goes somewhere. So that can make sense. It could also make sense for somebody who wants to make sure that they leave an inheritance of some sort, or they, have goals to gift money to family throughout their retirement. And so they might pick that option to make sure that while they're living, of course, they could be gifting their pension away. But if they passed away early, they can set it up so, that period certain 5, 10, 15, whatever the years are, could at least go to a beneficiary and serve sort of like an inheritance.
Right. And then compared to a single life payout, is the income less or more than?
So compared to it, the income is slightly less. It's usually not dramatically different. As we talk through all of the different options that are outlined, generally I tried to organize it in a way where it starts with the highest payment, and then as you progress through the options, the payment decreases, but there are some variables there.
Right. And there's another common option that folks may have to decide upon as well?
Yep. The other one that many married couples are faced with is the joint and survivor option. Most pension plans, actually, if you are married, they're required to pay out one of the joint and survivor options. And if you decided to not do a joint and survivor option and you were married, your spouse would have to consent to it. So it has to get notarized. The rationale there is that it's a marital benefit, that you've earned. And if one spouse wants to do something that would impact their spouse's benefit, the other spouse has to sign off on it. But basically how those work, that what it means by joint and survivor is that the pension benefit pays out for 2 lifetimes. So it is beneficial because it can be beneficial because it pays out for, a combined 2 lifetimes instead of just one person's lifetime. And like most of them, there's options. There is 100% joint and survivor option, which a lot of people are familiar with. It basically just means that, the retiree, if they retire, they start their pension benefit, that same amount that they're receiving would continue going to their surviving spouse if they passed away first. There's some other options where you have a less or a lower survivor benefit. So one of the examples I wrote is what's called the 50% survivor benefit. So the retiree would be receiving, whatever amount they get when they retire, say it's $1,000 a month. If they elect the 50% survivor benefit, when they pass away, their surviving spouse would only receive half of what they were getting. So, $500 in that example. And so this one, there are a lot of nuances here because when you map it out over your lifetime, it really does depend on all the other factors. What are Social Security benefits looking like? Are there any other income streams? Do you have a portfolio assets that you could use to offset a pension if, one spouse passes away before the other? So I think the biggest benefit of the joint and survivor options is just knowing that some form of income is going to continue as long as one member of the couple is still living. And one of the negatives with this option is that the higher the survivor benefit that you choose, then the lower the total benefit you receive every month is. So it's just important to kind of look at what would things look at, with the retiree living long, and what would things look like if the retiree passed away first, and then how does that survivor benefit look for the spouse.
And then there's one more wrinkle. Perhaps many people are unfamiliar with the Social Security offset. Tell us about that.
Yeah, the Social Security offset, it's not available on every pension. I've seen some that offer it and some that don't. For most people, it can be kind of confusing in the sense that when you read how it works and when you see the numbers, it shows that if you do an option like this, you get more money in the early years, which can seem really, really tempting. But for most people, and when I say most people, I'm thinking, fairly healthy retirees that are planning for a fairly long retirement and life expectancy. A lot of times it doesn't make the most sense because while it gives you a bigger benefit in the early years, it then gives you a lower benefit for the rest of your life. And so, maybe you get a higher monthly payment for 5 or so years, but then in exchange, you get a lower payment for the next 20 years. And so that one, it, for most affluent clients, an option like that, the math usually doesn't work out in your favor, but it's just important to know how it works and know, like anything in life, there's trade-offs. If you take that higher payment for the early years, what are you giving up in the later years?
Right. So would this make sense for someone who has maybe a shorter life expectancy, might be unhealthy, and has a shorter period of time to live, perhaps?
Yes, that's a great example, Bob, of when it would make sense. Like anything, there's always scenarios where something does make sense. That's why the pensions give you all these options, so you can choose the one that makes the most sense for you. But, somebody that has some major health problems or, even a terminal illness, an option like that could make sense because it gives more money to spend now, which, if you aren't sure that you're going to be here for a long time, having more money to spend now in that situation can make a lot of sense.
Yeah. So the last option, Amy, is one in which folks can take the entire lump sum.
Yep, the lump sum option is usually offered. Most pensions do have it, and it can be really tempting because you see, for a lot of people with healthy pensions, it's a six-figure number, and it could be tempting to say, I would rather be in control of that money. I want to take it. I don't want to count on the pension company. I don't want to count on that monthly income for the rest of my life. I will say in vast majority of cases, I very rarely recommend the lump sum option. For most people, taking some form of a monthly payment usually makes more sense. It adds it's an extra layer of security to a retirement plan. But like I think we've already said 3 or 4 times during our call already that it always depends. So of course, there's situations where the lump sum option could make sense. The two that I have seen most recent or most frequently is somebody that has several pensions. So if somebody has a few different pension streams, plus, they have Social Security coming at some point in retirement, sometimes what can make sense is they choose some of their pensions to pay out monthly, and then they also have Social Security, and then they choose one of their pensions to pay out as a lump sum. What helps us decide that is, of course, we look at all the math, but one of the big factors is when you add up monthly pension income and Social Security income, how much of your expenses does that cover? If you're in a situation where essentially you have so much pension income and Social Security that more than covers your expected expenses, there's not as much risk to taking some of that pension income, in a big chunk. So that's one case where it makes sense. Another case where I've seen it make sense is what's called a partial lump sum, where you take a portion of the pension as a lump sum, and then the other portion gets paid out, as a monthly payment stream. And that can make sense for someone who maybe doesn't have a substantial amount of portfolio investments on their own. So it kind of gives them a balance of having some guaranteed income for their life, and then a little pot of money that can be more flexible during the early years of retirement.
Yeah. So one curveball to throw your way, you mentioned a public pension, and in the article, the distinction between a private and a public pension is one where, at least with a private pension, the person who's taking Social Security as well as the pension would not be subject to the windfall elimination provision or the government pension offset, but those who have a public pension may be affected by that.
That is true. Yes. So with public pensions, a lot of times what happens during your working years is you pay into the pension system, but you don't pay into Social Security. And it's really important to make sure that you understand what those implications are. Because if you factor in Social Security at the full amount and you don't factor in that reduced Social Security benefit because of your pension, it could have a huge impact on the overall numbers in your retirement plan. So for anyone that does have a government pension, a lot of times it's teachers. That's what we see a lot, or other government employees. You just want to make sure that you've double and triple checked your Social Security benefits and you've factored in any reduction because of the pension that you have and because of not paying into Social Security system for a majority of your working life for most people.
So, Amy, we've covered a lot of ground. Anything we missed or anything that just bears reemphasizing?
I think the most important takeaway is, just like any financial decision, to do your homework, understand all the ins and outs, and don't make the pension decision in a bubble. I think that's the best piece of advice, because it really does have such a big impact on all the other pieces of your retirement plan. One of the things I always think of is a retirement plan or a financial plan in general. It's like a bowl of spaghetti. I don't know where I heard this analogy, but I love it. So if you pull one noodle, all the noodles in the bowl move around it. And that's the same as this pension analysis. If you make one choice, the single life pension, that has an impact on all the other pieces of your retirement plan. And so I think it's just, the takeaway is making sure you're looking at how all these pieces fit together and you make the best big picture decision, rather than, just looking at the pension in a silo.
Well, Amy, as always, thanks for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with our readers and viewers. It's greatly appreciated.
Thanks for having me, Bob. Great to talk about this with you.